Hi, my name is Kat Blair. I am a student support specialist at Arts of the Capitol Theater.
Is me coming live at you. How old am I? Because that's the real question. So I would say it's probably been about 30 years. I remember the first punk show I ever went to. I was 15, and the Ramones, before Joey died, was opening up for White Zombie. And so that was my first punk moment. And that's around the same time that I started going to see a lot of ska shows as well. So 15, so 30 years.
Probably since I was in high school. I've always kind of been drawn to more alternative styles and subcultures. So whether it was, I've been involved in the punk scene, the goth scene, the scene, the emo scene. Like, I don't know if you could tell by the everything about me, but it was never a phase. But I'm still relatively involved in the punk scene.
What is your favorite punk artist?
Ooh, okay. That's like asking me who my favorite person is.
You can give a list.
So I think
Top 5.
I can totally do a top 5. If I were to say my top 5 punk artists, Bad Religion is in there, Rancid is in there. I would put Bouncing Souls in there, but they're kind of on the line of punky, not really ska because there's not horns, but it's like, it goes together.
In the mid-1960s, among classic rock and roll, folk, soul, and blues, a new style of music began to emerge, garage rock. It is thought to have been the very beginning of punk music as a whole, as it rebelled against how mainstream rock and roll had become. With angry vocals and electric guitars, it is often dismissed as noise from unruly teenagers. Punk as a genre wouldn't fully emerge until the mid-70s.
Oh my God.
Or general bands that you think are the mothers of punk.
Or fathers.
Or fathers.
Well, I mean, okay, where? Are we talking
Let's
about, you know, Great Britain, and we're talking about like The Clash and Stiff Little Fingers and
talk
bands like
American
that?
punk.
So then it's got to be like the Ramones. It's got to be like Dead Kennedys. It's got to be, well, I'm not that old. So this is like a 70s. I mean, I guess I was born in the 70s. You should really be interviewing Eric. Like a 70s kind of up and coming, right? So punk came from this kind of distaste with disco and rock and roll, and they were looking and they were like, what are you doing? Like, because a lot of people will say, right, like rock and roll is not, Elvis did not start rock and roll. He stole all of his kind of songs and movements from black people, which is kind of where ska comes from anyway. And punk is kind of like that middle ground. But you've got, if you want to think about it that way, then you've got bands like Bad Brains. But I think there was a lot of influence that came from England and Ireland and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it came here. But I think when you think of the beginning of punk, you've got to have the Ramones in there. Because without the Sex Pistols, there wouldn't have been the Ramones. There wouldn't have been, I don't know. I don't know. I've never really kind of thought about that.
Oh, God. Okay, so that is very up for debate. In the US, it is believed to have been started in New York. I believe in the 70s or 80s. A few years after, I know that it started in the US first in like New York, and then a couple years after that is where you get London punk, and they are two very different styles of punk. And then from New York, you had the different subsets of like California punk, which is very different than New York punk. You would have like Western punk, which is also very, very different. You would have like skinhead punk, which real punks do not acknowledge. Can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Okay, the Dead Kennedys very famously have a song called Nazi Punks Fuck Off. Nazi punks are not respected, they are not real punks. They are everything that real punks do not like, and even in today's day and age. But yeah, I'd say New York. I don't know specifically in New York, but I know in New York City.
Do you know the bands that started punk, like in general?
I more know of like the cultural movement and like the fashion and like the DIY nature of it. I've actually been to New York City to one of the oldest still running punk establishments, like punk clothing establishments.
Nice.
It's called Search and Destroy. It's one of the oldest still standing punk clothing places in the country.
All right.
So that was pretty fun to be in there.
Yeah. What is the difference between ska, Riot Grrrl, pop punk, grunge, or other alternative genres?
So I think mentally there's not a super huge difference, right? Because I think if you're a rude girl like me, for anybody who doesn't know what a rude girl is, it's just somebody who listens to ska. So there's rude boys and rude girls. There's a sense of community, there's that social justice kind of line of thinking, right? Where, I mean, one of the biggest tours, I don't know if I want to call it a tour, but a big show that used to happen, I don't think it happens anymore, it was the Ska Against Racism tour. So that used to happen at the Webster Theater in Hartford, and all of these ska bands would come over, and it was just all to raise money for organizations that were working to uphold civil rights laws and, you know, not be jerks. I think that's like the biggest thing between punk and ska is that mantra that I use in class all the time. Like, just don't be a jerk. Like, people are people. Everybody has the right to be who they are. I think ska musically is a lot different, right? Because you've got more up-tempo, upbeats, you've got horns. It's really hard not to smile and be happy when you're listening to ska. And on the flip side, when you're listening to punk, it's like super fast, really ragey, depending on what kind of punk you're listening to. But they both tell a lot of stories and just include things that are important, like sticking up for what's right, non-conforming. That's why I always say, like, the punk is a transcendentalist sub-genre, right?
Okay. So ska has a lot of Jamaican influence, and I believe, if I'm correct from my college music theory class, rose to popularity in the late 1950s, and that's not to be confused with what we kind of know as ska now, which is actually more ska punk. Original ska was almost purely Jamaican influence and started as post-war music.
Not many people can cha-cha-cha, not everybody.
With Jamaican influence in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So that eventually turned into what we now know as ska with bands like No Doubt and Sublime, but that's more ska punk. Riot Grrrl is a faction of punk with more focus on feminist ideals. The original punk scene was very overly male saturated, so Riot Grrrl was a break off of that to be more women focused and minority focused and basically anyone who wasn't straight white man focused. Not that the straight white men didn't have a lot to scream and yell about, but maybe let's give some other people some voices. Pop punk is what you sing when you hate your hometown and you really like pizza and girls break your heart. And
I don't know, goth.
grunge is more, I don't want to say that grunge is more of a subset of, I guess, punk, made more popular by bands like Nirvana and whatnot. They're more of like a garage band sound, way less polished, way less commercialized, except for bands like Nirvana, which originally were not commercialized but became commercialized later on. Goth is its own thing. You've got bands like Depeche Mode.
Punk led to the birth of our main topic of discussion, Riot Grrrl. In the 1990s, Riot Grrrl was started by the women of Olympia, Washington, who were fed up with sexism in the male-dominated punk scene. The genre spread to DC, then the rest of the nation. A pivotal moment for Riot Grrrl was the 1991 Girl Night, a kickoff concert for the 6-day International Pop Underground Convention, where some of the most iconic Riot Grrrl groups performed, including Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, and Heavens to Betsy. The term Riot Grrrl was said to come from a group of women students in the Northwest who were tired of rampant sexism in the punk music scene. They wanted to start a girl riot against a society in which they felt marginalized, unappreciated, and without a voice. The 3 repeating R's suggested the growling and the ferocity of a wild animal. It was girl power at its most brash and unfiltered.
Riot Grrrl has 3 bands commonly credited with the start of Riot Grrrl as a genre, all mentioned in our last segment. Bikini Kill is the band with the most documented information. In the About section on their website, it says, Bikini Kill is credited with instigating the Riot Grrrl movement in the early 90s via their political lyrics, zines, and confrontational live show. Bikini Kill believed that if all girls started bands, the world would change. They actively encouraged women and girls to start bands as a means of cultural resistance. Bikini Kill was inspired by seeing babes in Toyland play live and attempted to incite female participation and build feminist community via the punk scene. They used touring as a way to create an underground network between girls who played music, put on shows, and made fanzines. Bratmobile has more complicated origins. Calvin Johnson asked them to play with Bikini Kill and some Red Velvet Sidewalk for Girls' Night in 1991, an offer which was rejected with Allison Wolfe saying that they were a fake band because they couldn't play instruments themselves. Robert Christie of Some Velvet Sidewalk decided to help them, lending them instruments and rehearsal space, and the advice to listen to the Ramones, which was rejected by Allison, who thought, if most boy punk rock bands just listen to the Ramones and that's how they write their songs, then we'll do the opposite, and I won't listen to any Ramones, and that way we'll sound different. Heavens to Betsy, on the other hand, had very simple origins. Middle school friends to late high school and early college bandmates. In the fall of 1990, Corin Tucker discovered the active underground music scene in Olympia with Bikini Kill and Bratmobile. She got connections and eventually got to perform at Girls' Night with her bandmate, Tracy Sawyer. All of these bands are amazing examples of the core of Riot Grrrl. Women helping women, pushing each other to use their voices, create a good community, and not fully closing it off.
I believe it was actually a congregation of a bunch of women what I read, there was some sort of like meeting that happened in either Olympia or Seattle? DC? Okay, either Olympia or DC, and it was a congregation of a bunch of women kind of wanting to meet about the lack of female representation in the punk movement and the lack of them talking about issues that affected women and minorities, and they wanted to break off and have their own musical genre that really spoke to and was important and powerful to them. And the reason it is spelled girl, Grrrl, is basically to accentuate like the growl that is very prevalent in Riot Grrrl.
Mm-hmm. Who is your favorite Riot Grrrl artist?
I'd probably be between the Donnas and Jack Off Jill. Probably be the two that I like the most.
Alternatively, what is your favorite punk artist?
Probably Dead Kennedys.
According to the Bindery Milwaukee, the organization that holds the Milwaukee Zine Fest every year, has defined zines as a self-published, non-commercial print work that is typically produced in small, limited batches. They touch on some common techniques that are used for making zines, but finish by saying the main rule is that there are no rules, which honestly does coincide with a lot of Riot Grrrl ideology of tearing down and reconstructing so many systems in our society. They also say that zinesters are likely to be more motivated by self-expression and artistic passion than they are by profit. Zines are usually inexpensive and sometimes distributed for free, or in trade for other zines, goods, and services. Zines are still a very pure form of art, something you make just because you feel like it, something you make to share with others. One of the most interesting parts of zines are the commonalities they tend to have. Zines can touch on a variety of topics from music and art to politics, sexuality, humor, and personal memoir. Their content may be written, drawn, photographed, collaged, or any other form of combining words and imagery. A zine structure may be narrative, journalistic, comic-like, or completely abstract. They're a great form of self-expression, and because they can be produced in small batches and really be anything. They were, and still are, a very important form of Riot Grrrl, being very accessible form of art.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Riot Grrrl still reflects the feminist movement?
Okay, so I actually think that Riot Grrrl now represents feminist ideals better than it did back then. Not that it wasn't trying, but back in the early 1990s, even though they did strongly push for feminist ideals and specifically racial equality and fighting against racism, it kind of was hard to not take a lot of people seriously, but take a lot of people seriously when they're like, yay, racial equality, we're all white.
White feminism is a performative form of activism. It is most common among white women, and all of its flaws lead back to that very demographic. Intersectionality is very important to this topic. It's an explanation of the overlap of marginalized groups. There's a huge difference between, say, a cishet white woman who would be considered a minority based on her sex and a queer black woman who would have to factor in her race, sexuality, and being a woman. White feminism commonly ignores intersectionality or tries to have authority over it. White women claiming that they know the struggles and the experiences of black women, queer people, trans people, etc. is the root of white feminism. Instead of using their voices to support and ally the communities that they are not a part of, they commonly speak over others, leading to a watered-down form of progress that is typically too little too late. People who are doing white feminism typically do everything they can to deny the privilege that they have, which typically comes from being white and of a higher socioeconomic status. White feminism commonly uses buzzwords, often misusing the word in the first place, leaving it with a watered-down and misleading meaning. This has happened directly with Riot Grrrl slogans too. For example, by the late 90s, Girl Power, a slogan that began in the pages of Riot Grrrl zines, started being appropriated by pop sensations like the Spice Girls. Some claim this to be the end of the movement. Others contend that it never ended and that bands like Pussy Riot are still carrying the torch today.
What about about Sylvia Plath or Charlotte Bronte or Simone de Beauvoir?
What did I miss?
The oppressive patriarchal values that dictate our education.
Good.
Hey! Mr. Morgan, is there any chance we could get Kat to take her Midol before she comes to class?
Someday you're gonna get bitch slapped, and I'm not gonna do a thing to stop it. And Kat, I want to thank you for your point of view. I know how difficult it must be for you to overcome all those years of upper middle class suburban oppression. Must be tough. But the next time you storm the PTA, crusading for better lunch meat or whatever it is you white girls complain about, ask them why they can't buy a book written by a black man.
That's right, Mom!
Don't even get me started on you two.
Now there's a lot more variety in the Riot Grrrl movement. There's a lot more artists of color that are spreading the same messages, and we're able to see it from the perspective of those who are actually affected, rather than, for lack of a better term, a bunch of white women who aren't affected by the racism that they are fighting against. That's not to say that they shouldn't have been and that they shouldn't have been amplifying voices, but they weren't really amplifying the voices of people of color when talking about racism. Now that is much more of a thing, that they're amplifying the voices of people of color, and there are far more people of color in the Riot Grrrl movement, which there should have been to begin with, and there should have been more avenues to bring them to the forefront than there originally were. There was a lot of caucasity in the original Riot Grrrl movement. I definitely do. So I would say that the three main components of Riot Grrrl were gender equality, racial equality, and economic equality, which especially during today's day and age and today's political climate, with all of the discourse that is currently happening both in person and online and any sort of medium, that is definitely still very relevant, and has been since Riot Grrrl's inception in the 1990s, the late 1900s. I think that that is still unfortunately something that people are fighting for. Doesn't mean that they should still be fighting for it, but they are.
It's still fucking relevant? So this song is an ode to how much we hope Donald Trump dies. Fuck Donald Trump!
So yes, I do still believe that the Riot Grrrl message is very much coinciding with today's modern feminist ideals.
So I never really listened to Riot Grrrl all those years ago. But I'm a girl, and I was in a scene. So there was this level of care and concern. So, I mean, I remember there was this one, like, super skinhead dude, and his name was like Billy or something, and he would show up to all the shows, and you know, most people would just kind of stay away from him, but I was like, I'm just gonna be cool. And he like looked out for me, and he never made me feel like he was gonna curb stomp me like he would some of my friends. So I think even just being a part of this scene, there's this community thing, right? Like if you fall in a pit, someone's picking you up, no matter who you are, what you look like. It's just because that's just the ethical thing that comes with being a part of a movement, right? Or listening to a kind of music. So there were always people looking out for me. A lot of the music that we were listening to wasn't like what was on MTV at the time, right? So there was like a lot of hip hop on MTV, like the thong song, and you've got all these girls in the videos with their heinies out and whatever. And there wasn't anything that was kind of written to make women feel less than or judged. Like I always felt safe. So I don't really know if I can separate the idea of just general community camaraderie scene stuff with a specific kind of, this band was a feminist band. I feel like most bands, I almost cursed, most bands just tended to care about people. And there wasn't a separation of who you were or why you were or what you were. It was just, you're here, that's rad.